going to record. All right, everybody smile pretty because now you're being recorded. So as the foundation invited ecosystem builders, who weren't all called that at the time, to come together and talk about what it would be to create a field called ecosystem building. And through the course of the past 3 years, we've had hundreds of hours of discussions and thousands of post-it notes and flip chart paper, all to come up with 7 goals, of which this is one of them, as a framework to create a field called ecosystem building. This call, Shared Vision, is all about a North Star, a mission, a vision, and some guiding principles and common language and all those things that will help form this field. So that's what we're going to focus on. And as we've had community calls in the last year or so, now the meetup calls are a little bit more curated, or definitely more curated, a little bit more content driven and peer learning opportunities. So the way we're going to shift a little bit of what we've been doing is we're going to just have a quick welcome. And I'm going to ask you a question to just kind of popcorn around and see who's in the Zoom call. And then I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany and Louisa, who are going to help Mike. Mike is our esteemed colleague at the Value Web. He is a facilitation guru. All things, we're just going to pump you up, Mike, so that people... don't feel intimidated. No pressure here, okay? So Mike,
I've been waiting for somebody to call me a guru for 15 years. So thank you.
Excellent. So, so now is your moment, and then we'll talk about. So the Value Web has been instrumental in helping many organizations come up with missions and visions, and then as we wrap up the last couple of minutes of the call, followed by some discussion about finding out how you curate missions and visions. What we'll do is update on anybody who's working on something around the project initiatives. Okay, so that'll be at the end of the call. So let's see, shared vision, and I just shared in the chat, for those of you who can see that, the Kauffman Foundation just launched yesterday an initiative called Start Us Up Now. And Start Us Up Now is called America's Business Plan. And it's a new business plan. It's a bipartisan policy maker focus on creation of new jobs and leveling the playing field for startups and small businesses. So, because we're looking at this as a shared goal across the United States, if you were to come up with a mission and a vision that you would like everyone on this call to form about. So advocate for something that you'd like. Tell us what, and it could be anything from this kind of big vision mission, or like Michelle Obama's get everyone to eat healthier, or maybe Nike's just do it. Like, if you were to come up with a mission or a vision for everyone on this call, what is the 1 or 2 sentence thing that you would like to inspire people to call to action? So we're going to popcorn. So I'm going to give you a second to think about it, and I will call on somebody who will then call on the next person. So I'm going to call on Brett. What are you advocating for, Brett?
All right, and just, can you frame that for me real quick? That was a lot to take in.
It was. Okay, so what is, and I'll put the question in the chat, what is a mission or a vision, some kind of thing that you would advocate, like a North Star? What would you advocate for someone to, or everyone on this call to move towards?
Okay. So I would say when you mentioned this new initiative, it sparked me. I used to be a kind of a local director for an organization called US 2020, which is now the makers Makers Movement, Makers, and oh, they just renamed it because the year 2020 is coming up. But the Makers Movement, and I always loved this as it relates to kind of a subset of this work. The mission that they have. Mission is to change the trajectory of STEM education in America by dramatically scaling the number of STEM professionals engaged in high quality STEM mentoring with youth. So what I love about it is because the work that we do now, there's such a mentoring component to it. And this was just a narrow slice of it. It was like, we're going to diversify the STEM fields. There's too many, they're too homogeneous. They're demographically not diverse. And so in an effort to do that, we're going to focus on STEM. We're going to make mentorship the tool and the vehicle that we do that around. And that's exciting. And then to scale that to the way that we think about things, the ecosystem is really going to be the vehicle that affects the change. And each of our organizations take a different view of how we look at it demographically. So I thought it was a good one to kind of relate to for the work that we do.
Okay, pick the next person.
Oh, that's right, popcorn. Okay. How about Peter?
I got unmute. Sorry about that, folks. Well, I'm going to borrow something that we're also working on. You went to your initiative, and I'll do similar. And that is that we've launched an initiative, or in the process of launching an initiative we call Achieving the Promise of Work. And it has many different dimensions to it. So I'm not, so in the context of what we're trying to do here as part of this entrepreneurship ecosystem, two areas that which intersect is sustainable economies that are characterized by a strong and vibrant private sector and stable and equitable growth. So to the extent that entrepreneurial ecosystems can help to build these kinds of sustainable economies and are distributed in such a fashion so that growth is more equitable and it's not concentrated in particular areas where already there are advantages. And part of that is equitable sharing of income and wealth. That in particular, again, in the context of what we're talking about here, you know, is around supporting, for instance, employee ownership, new forms of corporate engagement, such as, or not so new, but they're expanded use, for instance, of cooperatives and other sorts of things where, whereas as the value of the business grows, so do the wealth of the participants who are in that business. And it's really about more than just income growth. It's about wealth growth. And I'll throw it to Carol.
Okay, mine is, this is something I have suggested several times, but it's not something at the moment I'm working on. It's what I saw during my 20 years in Palo Alto. I would add, and I don't know if it's still going on in Palo Alto or not, because I've now been gone for almost 20 years. But when I was there, children could not get out of kindergarten without learning enough about entrepreneurship to have their own lemonade stand for at least one weekend. And they couldn't get out of 4th or 5th grade without inventing or creating a toy or a game. And so I would advocate for that kind of hands-on entrepreneurship education throughout the educational system, so that people learn about entrepreneurship just as easily as they learn their ABCs and their colors. So I will popcorn to, well, how about Celia?
I'm advocating for more community. So that's what I'm working on. That's what all of you are to me. And so my big thing is to connect people so they can better engage and feel a sense of belonging. So my ikigai, or my purpose, is connect, engage, and belong. So all of the work that I do is powered under that. So if I can get everyone to be more engaged and better connected and foster a sense of belonging, that's a win. I'm going to popcorn to Louisa.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I would say that my mission is to drive sustainable change, societal change that's market driven. So I think that a lot of times, especially in the ecosystem that I live in, people have sentiments, or they have, I don't know what the word that I'm looking for is, but there's a great need to create societal change that creates like positivity in our community, but it's not market driven, and it's not sustainable, and it's not change that I feel will be lasting. So that's what I would advocate, for us to be smart and strategic and data driven with the ways, strategies, and methodologies that we use to enact positive societal change in a way that is actually sustainable. So that's my thing. And with that, I will popcorn to Tiffany. Is Tiffany on? Tiffany's on this call? I'll popcorn to Tiffany. She's on the call.
Yes, I'm here. Hey, everybody. So I guess my perspective is that I think that, you know, as we all have touched on, how entrepreneurship changes communities, but in the rural communities, oftentimes it's overlooked as a job creator. And so I would really like to communicate that, you know, if we look at our own, we can grow our own jobs here if we provide and bring the resources that these communities and entrepreneurs need to be successful, which is similar, or I guess complementary to Cecilia's passion for creating a sense of belonging. In rural communities, it can sometimes be an us and they mentality, whether it's rural and urban, or even between different families who have been there for a long time. So creating, you know, a sense of belonging and possibilities for those communities, that if they look inside and who the talent that they have already, how can we grow and develop them so we can grow and develop our small businesses to create jobs. So who's Beth? I'll popcorn to you.
Hey everybody, sorry I'm driving and I'm not sure what the question is, but I'm guessing it's what is our current mission that we're on? Is that right?
Sure, that'll work.
Okay, so currently, and I think this is kind of my, as you said, Celia, my ikigai is like helping people to understand truly where each of our individual skills and talents lie, and how we can apply those to help solve problems for other people. And currently in my personal, individual, professional life, that means helping regions become more economically vibrant through developing more of a focus on developing entrepreneurial activity. And I don't know who to popcorn to because I'm in the car and I don't see who else is on.
Okay, so we can popcorn to Mike after, but I think we're going to ask Catherine to take part because she's on the call. So I'm going to put you a little bit out of your comfort zone, Catherine, and make you be a part of this. So if you will share with us what your passion and interest and mission is.
Hi. As you know, I well, those of you who heard me introduce myself, I'm just here observing Tiffany facilitate when she gets a chance to do that. So I don't know if I understood the question correctly, and I don't know I don't have any depth of understanding in the work that you're doing, although I've read some of the materials that Tiffany provided. But I would just wish for you all that a clarity of the purpose for these calls that you do, these regular calls. So
That's a good mission. I'm sorry I picked on you, put you out of your comfort zone, but we tend to do that. So so feel comfortable, be comfortable in the discomfort. Mike, what is your mission and vision?
I feel like the question changed from the beginning conversation to the end. But can you hear me, by the way? It's suddenly gotten slow.
I can hear you.
No. Yes? Okay. What I would wish for people on this call is to engage with the stance of systems leaders and systems leadership. I think this is a concept and language that I'm seeing everywhere for a reason. And I think ecosystem building in the context of systems leadership is a really productive way to think about what we're doing. I'll get into this a little more as I talk through vision and mission, but very broadly, it has to do with an awful lot of what we've been talking about for the last few years, especially around shared values and trust and collaboration, and looking beyond individual identity and agendas towards something shared and building something together, and sort of what the responsibility of leaders in that context can be. And so, yeah, my hope for people on the call is to be open to themselves as leaders in a very different way, given the reality of our place and our ambition in systems.
Okay, and I'm going to jump in before I turn it over to Tiffany and Louisa, because I see Andy is a little late to the party. So just as a form of introduction, very briefly, Andy, can you share with us your mission or vision or rally cry that you would invite everyone on this call to join in on? So what are you passionate about that you want to infuse into our conversation?
Have you seen my t-shirt? It says, not the one I'm wearing, it says mass collaboration. I did not invent that word. It is actually a great word to look up on Wikipedia.
Excellent. Okay. And Tiffany, you and Louisa get to...
So Andy, you're going to make us do our homework? Is that what you're saying? You're giving us homework?
True.
It was a bit of a cop-out, right?
A bit. Just a bit.
Thank you, Cecilia, for getting us started. Excuse me, I'm going to do just a brief overview of our call agenda. We have about 40 minutes left or so. We did our introductions and welcome. Then we're going to hear from Mike. He's going to talk about the work that he does through ValueWeb and how he can help us come together to determine a mission and a vision, or how can we find some clarity in that. We'll have an opportunity for Q&A, and then please be thinking about any project updates that you have that you'd like to share, because we'll do that at the end. And certainly, as Mike has touched on and as Cecilia has touched on, the goal of these calls and the purpose of these calls really is to further the field of ecosystem building, and how can we make progress as we talk every month. How can we, using Andy's term, really leverage this mass collaboration, these different perspectives and different points of view to make an impact in the field of ecosystem building from all of the different perspectives that we shared about through our introductions. Louisa, is there anything that you would like to add before we turn it over to Mike?
No, I think that you covered basically the big gist of what we're going to do. I am super excited to be on this call, and I apologize for not being visible right now. I am at the Startup of the Year conference, and I just finished judging a giant round of startups. So I have an hour break expertly timed for this, and I'm looking forward to helping to support Mike as he leads us through our mission, vision, values framework.
I'm so glad that the timing worked out for you to be with us. I'll share a link in the chat for everyone to the agenda and notes page. My one request for you all is to please use this time to really give your input and share and seize this opportunity when we are all together. And so you can put your comments or questions in the chat or add it to that agenda notes page and we can address it at the next time. But with that, Mike Fleisch, will you please share with us how you and the Value Web do your magic work?
That makes it sound so easy. I will share a little deck here that I put together. It's not many slides, not that one. Hold on a second. I did click Andy's link. Here we go. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm gonna hit present. Okay. I think what I teased before is that I think this concept of systems leadership is a really useful one for this group. And again, I think it's a concept it's useful now more broadly, and I'm hearing it more and more for a reason. I think an awful lot of the work that we do as facilitators and holders of the space for collaboration very naturally begs of us to start looking across those spaces and seeing what the connections are and how we can zoom out a little bit and see this set of things, if you go far enough out, as one system with productive spaces in the middle and places to play within that. I hope that a lot of that language already resonates with the way you think about ecosystems and your role in those. So I thought a productive lens into this conversation of vision and mission might be through the systems leadership context. So that's kind of where these few slides are coming from. This is from a recent publication from the Harvard Kennedy School based on some systems leadership work that the Value Web and others have done with them. These are learnings that I think, again, if you look at these, you could slap, instead of the journey of systems leadership, you could say this journey of ecosystem building, and an awful lot of what we've talked about and worked on, I think, fits into very similar framing and language. So just quickly going through this, no one is in control. That's our North Star. So agreeing on shared goal or vision. I can make a difference. So what's the impact that one person or organization can have? It's up to us. There's no them. It's all us. To go far, go together. We need coordination. So what's that holding function at the center of something? And I'm realizing I'm reading down instead of across, which is the way the numbers are, but that's okay. We're in it together for the long haul. Everything is connected. So that concept of finding those connections, we'll find a way. Again, going back to there's nobody but us to do this. And wow, change is happening. How do we recognize those moments and celebrate those together? So just quickly, so this isn't an all the way push, but I mean, does that look familiar to you all? Is there anything in there that already you would say connects quite a bit with the way we're thinking about the field of ecosystem builders, or any differences that are significant?
This is Andy. I was just going to chime in. I love number one, because I think the fundamental question of ecosystem building and also the work we're doing to build the ecosystem building field is, how do you lead when no one's in charge? And there's a really interesting tension that happens, which there's a perception that the Kauffman Foundation is in charge, but I can't make anybody, I work at the Kauffman Foundation, for those of you who don't know me, and I can't make any of you do anything. I can try all I want to control it, but I can't control it. And I think that fundamental question, both at the work that we're doing together to build the field, but also like in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where I worked, it's so hard because most humans have been raised in an environment in which there was a top-down hierarchy. We just waited till the top-down hierarchy to tell us what to do. And now you're asking me to operate in this environment where no one's in control. And that one just resonates so much, because an ecosystem on a local level, there's no mayor of the ecosystem, but some people like either think they are or think there is. And so that one really resonates with me.
The one thing that strikes me about this is the concept of system, and which raises the question about what's the boundary of a system. And I think boundaries a lot of times are often drawn too tightly, but also and then this notion of connection, I think, also speaks to that. So that, for instance, so I mentioned the project we're working on. We're thinking about this as based on some notion of what the community is, which it could broadly be called a system. But then also there's networks between communities. So the question of boundaries are there's an ecosystem that might be local, but then it's part of a much larger environment that is a series of that can be networked, and that's a different kind of system. And so I think those issues we don't have to answer, but we need to keep that in mind in terms of boundaries and what we when we say system, what are the edges?
That's great. And what do we observe, and what's productive, and how do you not make it so much that it's not meaningful? So yeah, great points. And just to connect back with what Andy was saying, I mean, I think that first one I'd say is really agreed, very counterintuitive for a lot of people, and in particular, I think for the place we're in some ways freeing to be able to recognize. I think we've sensed this or played into this or theorized this for a while. I was really glad to see that others are thinking the same way, and that this is even not only by observing the reality, but also by intent. When you intentionally make sure that no one is in control of this, that actually forces some really good things. It makes certain things much more difficult and more complex. It also forces some really good things, such as collective ownership. If it's going to hold together, that means there's something at the center that is holding that together. So I think there's some real benefits from this, as well as some discoveries to figure out how to manage it. But yeah, agreed. Great.
Number 3 really stood out to me. Everything is connected, because I see that both on the positive side and the negative side, where people can collaborate effectively and professionally and respectfully. So everyone grows, the whole field grows. Or if there are, going back to number 1, if there are organizations that serve as bottlenecks or roadblocks or gatekeepers, it has a ripple effect on the whole movement. And I think that it's really important that every action or non-action does impact the rest of us all trying to move forward.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and I think, if you look at the sub-bullet there, I mean, part of this I'd say is the act itself. It's one thing to see the picture when it's been created. It's another to actually partake in producing that together and surfacing what those connections are, and the sort of mutual learning that happens as a result of that in a way as its own product. I just saw that Beth asked to share this. And I have to check to see sort of what's okay to share, but this whole Kennedy school report I have as a PDF. If I can, and I just need to double check, but I'll just put this in a folder or send a link to this whole thing, because this is one slide from the executive summary, but the whole thing's pretty interesting. So I'll see what I can share, but I'll definitely send a link to this deck.
Thank you, Mike.
And I'll put it in the call notes. Yeah, great. Okay. You've seen this before, and it'll show up again at the end, but just to share the point of view that I personally have kind of grown within is this MG Taylor methodology. This is one of the central models of that process, and you can see the first 2 highlighted circles there of identity and vision. So an awful lot of change and creation and movement happens really with the recognition of this tension between current and future states. And so that point of identity being some recognition of, assessment of here's who we are, here's who we identify as in current state, individually and collectively, and then being able to, and this is one of the amazing things of sort of humans' capacity to envision something else and then actually move toward that, or at least try to. And so that space between what we consider to be true today, again, from many different points of view, and what we think we want to move to in some future version, Obviously, the individual snapshots that you might get from that can, with intent, which is the next bubble there, be brought together into something that is shared. And so really quickly, this model is one that we talk about in a lot of different ways, but it's very useful in terms of being able to articulate what are the steps toward moving from one current state, envisioning some other future, building collective intent, together surfacing the insight and understanding and really digging into understanding what that means, and then engineering, building, and using that new model, which then again generates a new identity. So this is both constantly in motion as well as recursive. If you zoom into any one of these, you would see the whole thing again. The split down the middle of the sort of right and left halves of this speak to a couple of things, but at the highest level, it's basically what starts as an individual process and then gets shared and connected in the back half of this of actually building and creating and using that new thing. Anyway, all models are tools. They're all imperfect, but this is one that we found useful for some of that. The next two slides dig into the sort of sub-bullet or the level of detail behind those first two. So identity and vision, which to me, understanding how we think about where we are today and how we identify together is a really necessary starting point for being able to do anything together and understanding what we're moving toward. And then obviously understanding vision as a collaborative process and as something that's collectively held. Any questions on this or thoughts on this or observations? I'll move on, but if at any point you do, by all means, stop me and just jump in. So this all comes directly from this practice, Matt and Gail Taylor and their collaborators, and this is all available online, but maybe I'll just give you all a second to read this through and then we can talk about it.
You know, knowing that there are a couple of people that are on the phone, Mike, can you
Oh,
give
thanks. I'm happy to read this. It won't take too long. Okay, I think it's worth doing. Thanks for that. Explore, discover, and understand how the system produces the conditions. Even if you think you know how it's done, think again. Use techniques of collaborative, creative design to see the system from different vantage points, which is another term I'll come back to. Break out of common assumptions and past practices. You can always go back to them if you need to. Build a working model of the current system that replicates the conditions you see. It probably won't be right, but it will lend some needed insight. Creativity is the elimination of options. So generate some optional ways of seeing the system and its components. And then in its own paragraph and bolded, work until you can see the truth in everyone's viewpoint. Emphasis mine. This means building models of these viewpoints. Then maybe you can assemble components of the viewpoints together to get a more robust map of the system and conditions than you could by clinging only to your own opinions. And to me, the super high level, if I had to summarize this, you know, in a sentence or a few words, it would be that it's one thing to do the intellectual exercise of understanding identity. It's another to create it through emergence and through the actual work itself. And so to me, this is really the high level takeaway that I think I came to as I thought about this, is that the work of creating the vision is the work of doing the work, and with connecting with other people and being intentional and conscious about that, and actually seeing the work itself as the work of creating that shared vision. And so on one level, that really is just seeing that and agreeing with that and claiming that together as a creative process in itself. So to me, at that point, work until you can see the truth in everyone's viewpoint. I mean, I think that's a really important statement that, again, really speaks to what I think ESHIP has aspired to, and sort of the central claim of ESHIP and the central theory of change is that we learn about this by doing this work together, and the connections that we make are the product itself. So again, my take, I'd love to hear anyone else's thoughts, and by all means, welcome contrarian points of view or adjacent points of view.
Mike, to help us maybe grasp this one, do you have any examples from like maybe a ValueWeb client separate from the ESHIP Summit that where you did activities or something that really helped
Yeah.
client do this
So
you described here?
Sure. So this is another really good point, is that every group is different, but very broadly in terms of the creative process, not so much that model that I showed, but how do we go from groups of people all holding individual points of view in their head to getting to something that is shared. And in particular, since we talk about vision statements, you know, which very often are really nicely crafted, catchy, you know, short statements that you have on the tip of your tongue, how does that process work? The closest example I'm, you know, thinking of right now is this Global Commons Alliance, which really started as a few organizations getting together and saying we want to have a dialogue around this concept of the global commons. They had the plan to have a bunch of talks from a stage with really great people in the audience, and the point there was people are coming together to hear from these great speakers. And very quickly, obviously, we asked that to switch around to a co-creative process. In terms of how we think about this, it's starting with something small, opening up a space that is shared, you know, so a beginning touch point that everybody agrees, yep, here's enough of a point to go on that I can be here and be part of this group. Opening the space and creating relationships and rails and a productive playground, basically, for people to be able to make those connections and have creative dialogue and work within, and creating that container, and then really building the intent to zoom that back down and crunch it back into something meaningful and landing something together. That rhythm of starting at a common shared point, opening something up, playing, and then closing it back down is really at the heart of everything we do. With the Global Commons Alliance, it exactly started as that. This shared moment where everybody said, yes, we have to take care of those global systems that are what support life on the planet Earth. And that was the starting point. There was enough of an intent shared to dig into this. So much of, I would say, our process of creating these types of touch points and artifacts is about the recognition that sometimes individuals are the right mode and the right way of approaching an issue or a question. Other times a whole group is what you need. Very often it's small groups, but really need to play across all of those. As you can imagine, and I'm sure everybody's been, you know, in this situation, having a group of 30 people trying to land exactly the right vision statement does not work. And it ends up being a really painful exercise where nobody feels heard. Everybody feels like you got the wrong thing. And it can be really brutal. And so very, very broadly in terms of that level of the creative process, we think of a very wide swath and being able to collect information from people, their experiences, the words that are meaningful for them, and really a bunch of information and you know, data can sound cold, but you know, anecdotal stories, thoughts, images, words, and really having a wide library and sweep that becomes the basis for meaning. From that, narrowing down, and really this describes our collaboration process as well, narrowing that down and focusing something into some meaningful pieces that you can play off each other and try out, really testing things. And then ideally, and this very practically and tactically, a small number of people to throw some darts and try some things and land on a few possible options that get iterated and vetted in, again, small groups, and then eventually spread back. Obviously, through that process, you want to make sure that the broad group of people sees themselves throughout that. The more open that process can be, the better. And the more that small group of people, you know, can have some experience with that, but also be open about that process and making sure that people see themselves in that end point, the better. I'll stop for a second. Yeah.
I have an aligned thought with a couple of the things that you said that really resonated with me. First of all, you know, one of my favorite exercises to do at a convening is a chalk walk. And for those who are unfamiliar, it's really an opportunity for people to brain dump the thoughts in their head and walk around in silence and contribute. And when you're able to do that, then you're not just focusing on the loudest voice in the room. Usually those of us who are extroverts take up a lot of space, and we don't leave time for and space for anybody who's an introvert to engage. The thing that I've learned about studying introverts and extroverts is that introverts usually are more in tune to the environment and the things that aren't being said. And extroverts, because we're so people focused, we're only focused on the people that are talking, as opposed to hearing what else is not being said or what's missing, right? So I think that's really important and valuable. So I love the idea of being able to engage everyone, and then everyone feels like they're part of whatever's happening. And whether or not you utilize or catalyze that one thing that they might have said, the fact that they were involved in the process is the biggest part. So the focus, as you were talking about, it's the doing, not the output, that we're focused on. So, I'm in the middle of writing a blog post about coming into community, and the thing about so I have two words next to each other, and in the sentence it says do something, and the something is bold. And then conversely, if you do something, so that the doing is the important part, and then the something is just like incidental, right? So I love the idea that if you get people together to collaborate and they foster that community, then even if they don't come up with something, that fosters a relationship where something will come out of it, and it doesn't have to be this particular thing. So I love that. Thank you.
So this is Pete. So Mike, let me ask you a question. And how do you address the issue, as with every commons, you run into the issue of the tragedy of commons, where it's collectively everybody's responsibility and individually nobody's responsibility to act or to do. And so I've seen a lot of efforts fall apart as a result, and where folks are gung ho, they've all got a role, but there's no accountability on that. And so how's this group, or what's your experience in terms of how you address that?
It's such a great question, Peter. And I would say I've seen the same of, really well-intentioned people and feeling like there was enough to hold them there, and feeling like something was held and that they all considered something important enough. But it can really easily slip through the cracks, especially, I think, because we are so used to more traditional structures, and we are not really well equipped, personally, and even infrastructurally, I guess. We're not made for that. And so I think some of that is there has to be shared ownership at the heart of something. And in particular, a coordination team. I mean, I'll just speak to this. This work changed dramatically when Christine and Cecilia started to hold something in a different way. And so I think that there's a level of ownership and buy-in that can be spread out really broadly. My experience has been that there still needs to be a small group of really committed individuals and people holding something more or less full time. I mean, I think, again, just speaking from my personal experience and very much on the Global Commons work, if there's not that held, certainly set of principles and beliefs that lets everybody know that, yes, here's why this is important to me, and here's how I see myself in this, here's why I buy into this, it's sort of a non-starter. I think you also really need that core team, a few individuals at least, who are really holding something in a dedicated way and being transparent about that, and holding it. I mean, the holding, if it's not done top down, it still has to be done.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
Yeah, the problem is it's a lot of times these initiatives or these collective actions, it's somebody's second job or third, and not their primary job. And and job, I don't mean in terms of employment. It's their second thing on their list, on their checklist to do. And you know, you get consumed by the thing that is your primary purpose or activity, and the other stuff falls apart.
Totally agreed. And I'd say my experience, again, just going back to the Global Commons, is that a couple people made it their primary. And in some ways, if there's enough will in the group for that, and a couple individuals hold it in that way, it's completely different than if there isn't. So absolutely, the point is now that I think this, you know, that first slide showing nobody owns it, that just doesn't exist very often. I think we're moving toward that, and hopefully appropriately valuing that coordination and sort of holding function at the center of things, because I agree with you. It has, unfortunately, to the detriment of many really great initiatives, it's not been valued properly.
Yeah, and you know what? I totally agree with this, and I was going to interject with that first slide with regard to, you know, no one owns this, but the fact that we do need to have a function that is that collective voice for the field, and you know, we've been attempting to integrate that backbone support function in our community, and I can see that for the whole field being very necessary. And how does that develop over time? Have you seen that occur, and what were the aspects that were in existence at the time when it was successful?
Yeah, I mean, the first place my head goes again is that unfortunately, you know, inertia is real, and so moving to a system that appropriately values backbone organizations and coordination and communication functions is not a quick and easy thing. You know, the work of collective impact, I think in some ways, if you go back to the origin of it, was very much intended to start to say we need to value that type of backbone organization differently. I'll just say too, you know, when you go back and think about the system and the way things are funded, you have to be able to show, like, you know, a badge of honor. Here's the percentage of our money that went directly to grantees. You know, here's how little was spent on the administrative costs of something. I totally recognize the validity of that and where that comes from. Unfortunately, I think really often it ends up subsuming what can be most valuable about the reality of some of those institutions that actually have a place in a system where they would be able to convene, communicate, and actually start to form meaningful culture and connections across those things. And so to me, it's almost the renegade, the ones who aren't obeying by the rules, who decide, well, this is the way it needs to be done, who kind of assume a position of leadership and do what they see needs to be done and what's right anyway, even if the sort of prevailing conditions are not incentivizing that. They find a way to play in that creates a different type of relationship and a different game within that system. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but it's almost when things don't go the way they're designed to go is when it happens.
The one, I apologize for talking too much here, but the one example where I think an idea of a collective works well is in a well-run improvisational group, because that's an example where everybody takes ownership, and and no single person has ownership, and it relies on a process where you're always affirming and enhancing what somebody else is doing in the group. And you know, you see that in improvisational theater, but you see that in improvisational music too. I mean, jazz groups and things like that. So they have conventions that you may rely on as part of the scaffolding, to borrow Cecilia's term, but maybe used differently than what she was intending. But it's you know, so there's a little structure there, but it really is the structure that allows people to go off of it and to
Yeah.
be from it. So
and very, very quickly, thanks, Peter. I mean, I think the word structure is really important. And so it's what needs to be in place. Sometimes what's the minimum, you know, what's the minimum viable structure to allow for the maximum creativity or work within that. If there's too little, then it doesn't carry any weight. There's nothing real there. it's very hard to create if you have an open, totally blank canvas. So both in, certainly in music, if there's a structure within which you can play, then you really have something. And so I think it's really the same thing here, is what's that level of structure that's enough and that actually opens things up rather than shutting it down. I'll move through this super fast. I'm not going to read all this, but just the point here again is reinforcing. I love this, the top highlighted point there. How can we describe the difference between the existing system and the new system in terms of operational properties, et cetera? So certainly as a really valuable insight. It's one thing to describe the future and what the vision is and what we're talking about. I think in particular, relative to what's today, I think that really starts to open up a productive dialogue around what the work is, and really even getting to a more finely tuned vision when we see it in relationship to what's happening today. Also, obviously, a much easier thing to talk about. I'm going to pass over vantage points for now, but again, it's in the deck. Finally, this is an image that we had come up with after ESHIP. You'll see the creative process built into that. I know that the language we've been using is around goals. Just to say that top left image showing the field of ecosystem building, you can imagine a vision in there and saying we're all trying to move toward this. So what are the large goals that we have? Obviously, this is one of them. What are the initiatives that move toward that? What are the projects? You can imagine that as a network map, and again as a system, and saying what's the thing at the center of this that holds it together. The point I see is that we are very much already doing the work of the left half of that creative process model. So much of the engineering, the building, and using, that's what's been in place. Even the insight, and so in some ways backing into the identity and vision, given what's actually happening now. I would not see that as backwards. I'd see that as a very natural progression from the current state of ecosystem building as a field. And I will leave it there, but thank you.
Thank you, Mike. That was a lot of information in not a lot of time, and I really admire your brain to be able to get all of that out. Did we cover everything that you were hoping to cover, or should we touch more on this on our next call?
I'd say I'm very up to continue this conversation. I think maybe between now and then, if people have thoughts or want to weigh in on any of that or bring other things to this conversation, I think that would be great. And I'm kind of happy to play whatever role makes sense in that. If it's explaining any of this further or digging into that or seeing how it connects with other things, really happy to serve the purpose of the larger conversation, however makes sense. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, we have just a couple of, Slack is great. We have just a couple of minutes before we close out here. My closing question for everyone is either A, please give us a update on a project or project team that you're on. And B, if you do not currently have an update to share, do you have any specific takeaways from Mike's presentation that you think it would be possible to implement for our next call in November? So I will throw it to Carol.
I don't have any updates on a Goal 3 project team. Tiffany, are you looking for any of this, for a project team related to any of the 7 goals, or just, excuse me, Goal 3? Excuse me.
Just for Goal 3.
I have nothing to report on that front. Takeaway from Mike's presentation, it's all, I'm just letting letting it all sink in. I take time to process stuff, and usually literally need to sleep on something before I might have some follow-up questions or some insights. So I'm afraid I'm a bust at this moment. So I'd like to send it to Peter. Excuse me.
Yeah, I have to unmute. Sorry. No, I don't have any update myself. As for Mike's, I chimed in so much. I don't have anything more to add to what he already said. So, Brett.
So on Mike's talk, you know, I find it really interesting. I was contrasting a situation that we have found ourselves in as an external ecosystem builder, coming into cities, working closely with them, and the trust barrier that needs to be overcome in order to really have any level of effectiveness at doing this work. And one community we've been in southwestern Pennsylvania, smaller town, very tight knit, but also very hard hit right now, and definitely in a lull economically. They really have the distrust of outsiders heavily, to the point where we went through an entire process of building some solutions that they could try to implement. And right on the heels of us bringing co-starters in to do a small business consult, they're the lead kind of person in the community, which again feels very much like this mass collaboration concept, as long as you have that trust piece down. You know, was up in arms. Like, how are we bringing an outsider, and who is this organization to really think that they can, you know, throw new ideas? And it was just so obvious that this is really hard work, especially when there's geographic space between it. So needless to say, we appeased some concerns and went into the train the trainer type training the co-starters does, and came out of it with just like local stakeholders beaming, talking about how they were going to use this forever, you know, how they could replace some of the programming they've been doing for years with this. And businesses really excited about what they were hearing and signing up in droves. And so like in a week, you know, you just saw like the trust barrier completely be overcome. And, you know, this concept of people really buying in, showing through, from pretty much from white to black in that time. So that definitely resonated with what Mike had to share. And I will throw it to Louisa.
Hello. I'm gonna have to like jump off right after I give my update, which is that I don't have any updates as far as projects go. But thank you for facilitating and kind of walking us through that, Mike. Sorry that I wasn't able to kind of like actually view it, as I'm kind of in transit at the moment, but I really enjoyed it, and I don't have any updates. And I have a hard stop right now, so I have to go, you guys, but I will talk to you soon.
How about you, Beth?
Hey, so no project updates for goal 3, but from Mike's talk, Mike, thank you very much, and thank you, Tiffany, for having the vision to share this with us. My initial takeaway is that it's putting some framework to what we've been doing for the past few years, and we're not crazy kind of affirmation. So thanks for that. I'm very interested in learning some more and digging in more deeply. So hopefully we can continue this kind of conversation next call. And I don't know who to popcorn to. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I do. How about let's go to you, Tiffany.
Well, the biggest takeaway I had actually was a comment that Peter had made about an improv group being an example of a successful sort of non-leader group working together, particularly when he said, you know, the yes and approach. I don't often think like that. I think of a no, this is better approach. And so I really like that perspective of, instead of thinking, you know, why my idea is better than your idea, like, yes, both of our ideas can be great. How can we combine them and utilize them? So that's what I took away. I've gotten some private messages here that people would be interested in hearing more from Mike on the next call. So Mike, we can talk about how we can include you again. I'd like to remind everyone that we can continue this conversation on our Slack channel. And our next call is November 20th at noon. That's also Global Entrepreneurship Week. So that will be an excellent week. And with that, I'll thank everybody, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye all.
Thank you.